Hello everybody and welcome back to a brand new video. We just hit 42.6k subscribers. Let's try to get to 43k. Please like this video down below and subscribe to the channel before we get started. And today we have to talk about Donald Trump in terms of the polls. We have to analyze the recent polls because there's been a lot of development going on within the recent polling that we've seen, and it's not necessarily looking that favorable for Joe Biden. As you know, about a couple of weeks ago, Donald Trump was bottoming out. Many people even on the right were saying Trump is in trouble. Trump's going to lose Texas. Trump's going to lose South Carolina. He's going to lose Florida by 15 points. And we've seen a little bit of a shift since then. Biden was up in the average by 10.2. But since then, it's been a couple of weeks, Donald Trump has fired his campaign manager roughly around, that time when he was down by 10 points. And now he's down by just 6. He's gone, in the terms of the polling average, he's gone from, being at 40% up to 43. Biden's gone down from 51 to 49. Not much movement, but you do see a lot of Trump voters coming home, which is a very, very good sign. And a lot of it has to do with his change in messaging. He's becoming a little bit more populist. He's deciding to take care of the people. He's taking care of business when it comes to actually doing briefings and things like that. And as a result, guys, it's paying off. Donald Trump right now is at 43% in the polls. Biden is at 49. That's a 6-point gap. If the election was held today, that means Trump would probably lose the popular vote by 5 or 6%. And it's technically possible that Trump could win the Electoral College at that point, even though the path would be extremely narrow. Personally, I think Trump is going to have to narrow that gap to about 4%, but I definitely think that he could do that very easily. And as you see the race right now, the trajectory is not necessarily in Biden's favor. A lot of people on the left were saying Biden's lead is so stable compared to even Hillary's. That's why Biden was winning, and it was not like 2016. But Biden's lead, yes, it was stable for a while between 7 and 9%, and Biden might go up again if Quinnipiac releases one of their garbage polls and it falls back in the aggregate. This is true. But the bottom line is the leads have not always been that stable. Biden was up by 13, then he was up by 10, then he's gone up and down and up and down. The period of time between late 2019 and before the riots in 2020, Biden, the lead was relatively stable, but it was a 4-point lead for Biden. It went from like 3 points for Biden to 6 points for Biden. Then Biden gets a big bump. He goes up by 10, but then Trump is starting to make up some of that ground, especially because, in my opinion, he's taking more initiative. He's doing briefings and things like that. And while you have a lot of people on the left that will hate him no matter what, Trump is slowly starting to get the right-leaning independents back on board. And that's why his polling numbers are starting to go up, as you can see here, all the way up back to 42.7%, all the way down from 40 on the nose at the start of July. So that's very good news for Donald Trump. In terms of Trump's approval rating, his approval rating, despite some awful polls we've seen out of places like Quinnipiac, out of places like Morning Consult, Trump's approval rating has still gone up from roughly around 41 to 43% in the process. He's probably around 44% if you take out all of the outlier polls, and to be fair, that would include Rasmussen in terms of the polling average, as well as some of these polls like Reuters and Politico. It's all just two sides of the same coin. Take them out, Trump is roughly at 44% approve, 54% disapprove, kind of where he was in the midterm elections. So there's really no surprise there. In terms of going back to the national average, I'm talking about Trump and Biden. You look at what polls exactly have it closer than others. And you have the number one holy grail of 2018, Emerson. Emerson got the Georgia race right. It got the Texas race right, even when the polls were overestimating Republicans. And in some other instances, it also got the generic ballot right at D+9 or D+8 to D+9. It nailed a whole variety of races. Missouri, it nailed Missouri when the polls were overestimating the Democrats. It nailed Missouri. So a lot of people are scoffing at Emerson, saying it's not reliable, but it does use a likely voter screen. It uses a likely voter sample, and looking at it, is probably one of the most reliable polls. Now, in terms of party ID, a lot of Democrats were saying that, Democrats were not being oversampled in the polls because Gallup showed that the party ID showed a D+6 advantage, which was true at the time. But over the past month, it has now gone to D+1 in Gallup. Personally, I think Gallup is a little wishy-washy. It fluctuates significantly in either direction. I would take the middle ground. Trump will probably have to deal with a D+3 sample like in 2016 or a D+4 sample. Either way, I think he has a good chance to win, especially if he can turn out his base, which consists of many Midwestern right-leaning independents that don't usually vote in elections, don't vote in midterms, don't usually even vote in primary elections. That's why a lot of people, when looking at the Michigan data, they were saying this doesn't look good for Trump, but then they have to look at the past data trends in education, and they have to take that into consideration as well. And in terms of party ID and weighting the polls, this is something a lot of people have said and criticized me for, because Karl Rove back in 2012 decided to moronically assume an even sample of Democrats and Republicans and claimed Romney was in fairly good shape, and it ended up sinking his campaign. I'm using a correct party ID sample that I expect Democrats will probably be a 3+5% advantage come November. And that's what I've been weighting the polls with. And one thing I noticed is a lot of the polls, when weighted properly, they're starting to make a lot more sense. In fact, the disparity in the polls, I would say a few weeks ago, was about 4 to 5 points between the national aggregate, which was like 10.2, and my aggregate when weighted, which was like 6% in difference. Now it's just a 1.1% difference, which is ironically the same margin the national polling average was off back in 2016. I remember Nate Silver would skew the polls and people were laughing at him even on the left, and we know Nate Silver's not really a pro-Trump fan at all, and he was saying that Trump would get a 1 to 2% advantage every single poll he would supposedly skew. And you're seeing a similar thing happen here. So I think that 5.3 sounds right for the national average. If you take the outliers out, Biden would be up by just 4.3%. And in that case, the Electoral College is basically a toss-up. Trump has a narrow path to victory if he loses the popular vote by 4. In terms of what the polls are showing when weighted, we're starting to see a lot more polls actually overestimate Trump's support as well. For example, the Emerson poll, when weighted properly, gave Biden an extra 0.1%. Same thing with the Rasmussen, which, by the way, Rasmussen, in terms of the national polling, has a little bit of a different sample than it does for the approval polling, so it might be a little bit more accurate when it comes down to that. In terms of YouGov, that was really the only poor sample for Biden, where Biden, when weighted, would lose a net 5.1%. Also, IBD poll had Biden gain 3% when weighted properly. And you kind of saw this throughout. It was kind of a wash. So the polls are starting to make a lot more sense in terms of crosstabs, especially when it comes down to party ID, and it's relatively showing it. So this election right now is going to go down the wire. You could call this election a toss-up or whatever you want to call it. But the bottom line is I think Trump has the trajectory of the race in his favor. If you look at this same day, back in 2016, Hillary Clinton led by, I believe, 8%. Biden now leads by 6.4%. Obviously, Hillary was going off the convention bump. Biden is not really having a convention, at least not one that people are going to really be watching and tuning into. Trump's having a scaled-down convention. It's my bet that Trump gains the most out of a convention bump. When it comes to the debates, even if they are done by Zoom or whatever, I still expect Trump to edge out victories in the debates, whether they happen. Which is a whole nother question, and that could probably give Trump another 2 to 3% in the popular vote, because you look at the trajectory over the past couple of weeks when Biden was up by 10.2, that's already gone down 3.8%. Another 3.8% in the polling aggregate in favor of Trump would mean Biden plus 2.6. At that point, Trump will win the Electoral College at that point. He may even win the Electoral College by more than he did in 2016, despite losing the popular vote by a little bit more, and that doesn't even take into account the fact that the polls and the undecideds may break for him in the end as a result. So we may see more movement. We know Trump's doing a lot of executive orders and a lot of things like protecting pre-existing conditions, cutting taxes a little bit more for workers, and in terms of an eviction moratorium, as well as making sure companies hire American workers during the pandemic. That's only going to help him not only with his base, but with a lot of independents, and especially people in the populist Midwest who may be undecided. He can get more of those people to come over to his camp. So it's looking like a fairly good trajectory so far for Trump over the past couple of weeks. I think his campaign manager has done a great job, but we still have a few weeks to go. You know, Biden might rebound with another round of polling, but Trump could easily make that up in the next round. So we'll have to see. But in terms of Trump being on the right path of messaging, I completely agree. He just needs to solidify his support in the Sun Belt. And then he needs to work on the home stretch in places like Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, again, maybe even add Minnesota and New Hampshire to the mix. And at that point, he very well could be destined for victory, regardless of what some of the early pundits and projections have been saying. So anyways, guys, thanks for watching this video. Please like this video down below, comment down below, and subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell for notifications so you never miss another video. Follow me on social media. Donate to the Patreon or subscribe. Star links in description. As always, guys, thanks for watching. Red Eagle out.